Eduardo Carli de Moraes, who is a filmmaker and a PhD candidate in philosophy at the Federal University of Goiás in Goiânia. And the title of the dissertation you're completing there is Between Utopia and Dystopia, Film Philosophy in the Anthropocene. And you're currently visiting for half a year in the department and at ASCA. And great to get the chance to get to know your dissertation work. Please join me in welcoming Eduardo.
Well, thank you all for coming. I must begin by thanking both Carla and Monique for all the kind efforts you made in my behalf so I could get here in the Netherlands and become affiliated researcher here at ASCA for 6 months with a scholarship by the Brazilian Ministry of Education, by CAPES. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, so I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of this ongoing research. So I'm going to jump right into it. The Anthropocene enters the scene. The image you see, ivory burning in Kenya, is quite a thought-provoking one from the films made by Jennifer Bakewell and Edward Burtynsky. And this research tries to discuss the idea that a new geological epoch has begun called the Anthropocene. So the Holocene has died, and now humanity has become a geophysical force. That's an expression by Chakrabarty, and it has a profound, unprecedented impact on all ecosystems and climates on our planet. And my aim is to deal with artworks, mainly science fiction films and documentaries, that are trying to depict, criticize, create narratives, and of course many of them venture into futurology about this current predicament. And I'm trying to interpret such films as a relevant cultural production that can aid us in deciphering humanity's dilemmas in the so-called Anthropocene. And it proposes as some conceptual keys to unlock doors for critical thought, a sort of dialectics between utopia and dystopia. So we can surely see an upsurge in cultural production about these themes. This is one great example. It's a trilogy, Manufactured Landscapes, Watermark, Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, produced by the National Film Board of Canada and directed by Jennifer Bakewell and photographer Burtynsky. And the poster of each film reveals the extent of human activity on the landscape, right? And so, of course, my work doesn't deal with the natural sciences, but just as introduction, I brought here José Lira Veiga, which is a Brazilian researcher that tries to create a bridge between the human sciences and art production. And he wrote in The Anthropocene and the Humanities that humans have become a telluric force, changing the way of the earth as much as volcanism, tectonics, cyclical fluctuations in solar activity, or the changes in the earth's orbital movements around the sun. So to recognize the Anthropocene means that natural history and human history, taken from the beginning of the 19th century as independent and incommensurable, now become thought of as a single geohistory with the addition of this new telluric dominant force, which seems to suggest that the end of nature seen as a mere external background to the drama of human history, And venturing into futurology, he also says the human inhabitants of this planet will face, within a few decades, global environmental changes on unprecedented scale and speed. So these are some of the authors that have been trying to describe what the Anthropocene means. And of course, as a scientific proposal, the Anthropocene evolved from several works that they are not in my focus, but Edward Suez, Vernadsky, Stormen, Crutzen. I was told when I arrived in the Netherlands that it's a Dutch concept. I'm not sure if nationality has anything to do with this, but actually Paul Crutzen, who worked about the ozone layer depletion, is the one who made this term a buzzword. But my focus is the fact that the Anthropocene has now a widespread presence in the human sciences, in the artistic scene, cultural studies, and Rosi Braidotti calls it a buzzword. It's like a trending topic, but she also criticizes it as some discursive commodity. You know, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books and papers published with the Anthropocene as its main theme. And so I've been trying to research how some artworks are dealing with that. We have paintings, for example. This is Mark Hansen's March of Progress. And it's interesting that human beings are also present here in this very chaotic spread of, let's say, human industrial fossil fuel burning civilization. And this leads me to show some scientific imagery today that's being taken from films. This is, for instance, from Breaking Boundaries. It's a Netflix documentary, and it's interesting because science needs ever more to express itself graphically in imagery such as this, the breaking of planetary boundaries. And here also imagery taken from a philosophy book, The Good Ancestor, which tries to synthesize the great acceleration, human impacts on the living world, accelerating since the 1950s, which is now considered the start date for the Anthropocene era. And you can see here an upsurge, a tendency upwards to a series of things like, of course, global warming, global surface temperature in red, loss of tropical forests in green, decrease in species, upsurge in energy use, water use, paper production, new motor vehicles, and of course carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this, I think it's a synthesis of what has been happening with the planet since, let's say, the Industrial Revolution, and an upward tendency, the great acceleration, that really worries, I guess, all human earthlings, and also artists and filmmakers. So in my work, I try to find some films that have been dealing with that matter. And one idea that I present to you is that futurology without genealogy tends to be blind. So in order to create a culture, when we have speculative fiction, anticipation narratives that are well-grounded, we need to understand how we got to our current situation. And this film is a good example of that. L'Homme a mangé la terre is a French film based upon a book, L'événement Anthropocene, which offers a chronological critique of the ideology of progress, let's say. And of course, both the book and the documentary can be approached by the critical philosophies proposed by Benjamin, by Ginter Enders, Hans Jonas, Hannah Arendt, Dupuy, Anselm Yap. There's lots of thinkers that are dealing with this matter of, let's say, mankind devouring the earth and leaving for future generations some sort of wasteland. So this is an example, and some philosophers that are really immersed in this debate. Donna Haraway, she claims that fossil burning human beings seem intent on making as many new fossils as possible, as fast as possible. So this is a statement she does in Staying with the Trouble, which is a book which comes also with a film, Storytelling for Earthly Survival. And we have here the idea that it will be read in the strata of the rocks by geologists of the very near future, the fact that new fossils are being produced in accelerated manner by what she calls the fossil burning human beings. So this is surely a very interesting film which gives the biologist and the philosopher Haraway the stage for her to speak about how arts and culture also can help us in earthly survival, because she thinks we don't need only science to deal with this crisis, but we also need the artistry and the cultural production that will help humanity, let's say, in the mess we're in. So this is one film I interpret. And of course, for example, on the matter of massive burning of fossil fuels from the 1850s onward, we have lots of films that help us with this genealogy of the crisis. Let's say the saga of fossil capital, like Andreas Malm calls it. And for instance, There Will Be Blood by Paul Thomas Anderson, or The Oil Machine, which was recently screened at the Rotterdam AFFR Festival. So these films have produced very interesting genealogies of the current crisis of greenhouse gas emissions of stratospheric proportions. So for every facet or fact concerning the Anthropocene, there's nowadays imagery and aesthetic experiences correlating to it. And both Haraway, Braidotti, and other authors, such as Colbert, they claim that the Anthropocene can't be understood without the sixth mass extinction of biodiversity that's happening right now. And it's unprecedented because it's the first one caused by a dominant species, the self-baptized Homo sapiens. And then we get, for example, Colbert comparing the current biodiversity loss with the last one, which occurred 66 million years ago when the asteroid collided with the Earth, and saying, now we are the meteor. That's very problematic, because it tends to claim that humanity as a whole has become the meteor. And of course, this has resonance in pop culture, a certain catastrophism that's gaining ground in Don't Look Up, for example, the recent blockbuster Netflix apocalyptic comedy. We have also in comics these catastrophes being depicted. For instance, here, how's that top of the food chain theory working out for you? and the impacts of climate change in the space of 1 century, from the time of the Titanic and 1 century later. So pop culture has become somehow immersed in catastrophism, and we are in music also. We have examples like Grimes produced an album called Ms. Anthropocene, and so on. So this is one part of the thesis. I try to interpret some films. In documentary filmmaking, there are lots of authors dealing with that. I already mentioned Baikwell, but there's Luis Psihoyos. He won an Oscar for Best Documentary Feature with The Cove, and then he made Racing Extinction. And this is interesting because it's documentary filmmaking dealing with the crisis and trying to provoke activism. So this is really political cinema. We can see it also in Naomi Klein's and Avi Lewis films. And it's interesting also the catchphrases the films communicate. So it's better to light one candle than curse the darkness is the phrase for Racing Extinction. And here the Cove, man is their biggest threat and their only hope. This film deals with the slaughter of dolphins in Japan and how the activists raged against this. So in the thesis I try to differentiate between documentaries that are didactic and they tend to provoke activism, but in the other side we have films that are made for contemplation, that are really detached from what they are depicting. And so they're the films of Godfrey Reggio, Ron Freich, Nicholas Gerhalter. So inside the documentary filmmaking today, we have several strands of films dealing with this crisis. But also we can look at classic sci-fi and look to Blade Runner, for instance, with a new lens. So there's a Brazilian philosopher called Juliana Fausto. She has been talking a lot about the disappeared of the Anthropocene. And she says that Blade Runner should be read also as a work of art portraying the emergence of mechanic, artificial, pseudo-animals, you know. So this dystopia in Los Angeles is filled with electronic replicas of species gone extinct or extremely rare, like the electric sheep of the title of the K. Dick novel that inspired it. So this is a work of art that deals with the aftermath of something called World War Terminus. So it's a post-catastrophic world radically deprived of its previous fauna and flora. So the film is not dealing only with the upsurge of the cyborgs, the cyber organisms, but also with what Juliana Fausto calls animachinas, which is animals plus machines, mechanical animals, electric sheep. So this is one lens to read a classic sci-fi film such as Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, which is also a very trendy saga with new films coming up by Villeneuve and stuff. And here the idea that for many centuries in the Western tradition a radical distinction existed between physis and techne in Greek terms, or natura and ars in Latin terms. Natural and artificial were two clearly distinct, almost antagonistic worlds, but the border that separated these two universes has been dissipating. So this is one of the main themes of Paulo Sibilia's The Post-Organic Man. And reading this work, I made a list of proliferations that kind of make this claim really truthful, I guess. We have seen proliferations of robots, cyborgs, androids, clones, prostheses, plastic surgery, mechanical limbs, microchips inserted into brains, bioports, which is a great theme of Cronenberg's, OGMs, genetic engineering, machines that learn, intelligent algorithms, and so on and so forth. So nature and artificiality can no longer be seen as separated, but they are kind of in a hybrid process of mixing together. And then I come to one interesting proposition that I'm trying to work with about cinema. Cinema as a confluence of science and arts, it can be seen as part and parcel of the Anthropocene. So cinema is inside the core of the matter, let's say. It inhabits the Anthropocene as one of its main aesthetic practices. And here I'm going to briefly introduce to you Jennifer Fay's Cinema in the Time of the Anthropocene, Inhospitable World, when she says that cinema enables us to glimpse anthropogenic environments as both accidental effect of human activity and a matter of design, insofar as cinema has encouraged the production of artificial worlds and simulated wholly anthropogenic weather. It is the aesthetic practice of the Anthropocene. So this is a very interesting idea. In her book, she goes on to analyze films by Buster Keaton and also films from contemporary China, like Still Life, which deals with citizens displaced by the construction of the Three Gorges Dam in the Yangtze River, the hugest hydroelectric project in mankind's history, with more than 2 million people that had to move away from their homes for its construction. And I would like, in the few minutes I have left, to explain a bit what she means about the aesthetic practice of the Anthropocene being cinema. So Fay tries to integrate the concept of the Anthropocene in media, studies, cinema, and she says that cinema has a unique affinity with the Anthropocene because it has ensued from the Industrial Revolution, and film production, it occasions artificial world making, unnatural weather, acts of destruction, and she is basing this claim on the work of Siegfried Kracauer also. Let me jump to here. So here's an example that cinema is not outside of the Anthropocene, it's not exterior to it and looking in. Cinema is not providing a peep show into the Anthropocene, it's not indifferent or unengaged witness to it, but it's a part and parcel of that. And for example, the flood that happens in Metropolis in Fritz Lang's film is one of the great Jennifer Fay's insights, because she goes to the work of Kracauer, and Kracauer notes by visiting UFA's studios that she goes on to discuss if cinema is a window or a mirror. It's a very interesting discussion to have. She says it's a cliché to observe that cinema is a window onto the world, to our environmentally degraded world, but Kracauer helps us to fathom that cinema mirrors the practice of human wording. So the great studios of the industry of film production, as Kracauer says, one could also make real things out of them. For example, the workers' quarters in Metropolis by Fritz Lang, they are fabricated to succumb to the spectacular flood that happens in the film, but also crafted within the studio. And this flood is unleashed by the robotic pretender that's also some sort of Frankensteinian creature inside the narrative. So this is one idea I'm developing, and in 2 or 3 minutes, I don't have that much time, but I'm also dealing with utopia and dystopia. And my main idea is I don't think we should operate with either or logic, as if utopia and dystopia were mutually excluded. But utopias and dystopias, they are intermingling, they are blending together rather than manifesting themselves in a segregated manner. So we have hybrid works that are both, they have elements of utopia, elements of dystopia, and so I'm proposing some kind of dialectical approach when each artwork can be seen as a synthesis of utopia and dystopia. There's a preponderance of one of these elements, a singular synthesis, and there are some examples here. For instance, Elysium is of course a film with some utopic imagery and suggestions. It promises ever-enhanced high-tech surgery and medicine, providing a life expectancy that goes upwards, leading almost to a utopia of ever-continuing life aided by machines. But there's the dystopia, the threat of extreme inequality to access Elysium, which is a VIP area in outer space only for the 1%, let's say. So I see utopia and dystopia mingled in several films, in several artworks that show kind of the same landscape with dystopic and utopian elements clashing and contradicting. So I'm also dealing with the effects these films produce, and I'm trying to make a correlation between utopia and hope, dystopia and fear. So when the spectator sees a film, it's affected by it, and I'm trying to figure out a way to understand how utopianism addresses our most hopeful impulses, and how dystopias, they tend to generate fear or even panic or feelings of eco-anxiety. And there's a lot here that I need to say, but I know I'm running out of time. So quickly, in Brazil we have lots of very interesting scholarship about that. This is a book by anthropologist Viveiros de Castro and philosopher Deborah Danowski, and they are dealing with the cultural phenomenon of proliferating dystopias. So they analyze films such as Lars von Trier's Melancholia, Bela Tar's Touring Horse, or Abel Ferrara's 444. In this book, translated as The Ends of the World. So it's one work I'm dealing with. So they try to understand philosophically, anthropologically, the catastrophism that's in our culture. And for instance, they say that the famous No Future of punk movement has been suddenly brought back to life with full force, you know. So I'm also dealing with the cinema of eco-trauma. There are lots of interesting production dealing with the climate crisis, the ecological catastrophe, that as it worsens, the subjective realm is also portrayed in the films, like protagonists who suffer from eco-anxiety, eco-grief, eco-trauma. These are things that are gaining momentum, and you can see it in the work of Bong Joon-ho, the South Korean filmmaker who made The Host, Okja, Snowpiercer, and Parasite. You can see it in Todd Haynes' Safe. You can see it in Polluting Paradise by Fatih Akin. So lots of scholarship being done about figures such as the protagonist here, played by Julianne Moore, who is deeply sickened by the pollution in the paradise she lives in. So there's also lots of films concerning animal liberation. I'm not going to delve more deeply into it right now, but concerning waste and garbage also, matters of planned obsolescence, the invisibility of the workers that deal with garbage, and science fiction also, like Wall-E, dealing with the wasteland we used to call Earth, in a futurology of mankind becoming a multi-planet species or something like that. And I have some clips, if you wish. I think it's better for us to have a small discussion right now. But I have selected some scenes. I've been calling them Anthropocene from four documentaries, and All That Breeds. It's a very impressive film, recently screened in Rotterdam also. It's a good example of engaging storytelling, because it tells the tale of these guys in New Delhi, India, and they are dealing with birds, with kites, who are dropping from the sky because of the pollution. And the film has theories about why this is happening, you know, and it's a very interesting philosophical film, because they chose to work by mending the broken wings and bruised organisms of these birds in order they can fly again. So this is kind of a Sisyphus job, you know. It reminds me of Camus a bit, because of course they are not dealing with the root cause of the problem, which is the manufactured sky, the emission of pollutions, the megalopolis and its garbage, but they are mending the wings of the birds that are dropping from the sky. This is a really poetic and thought-provoking film. And I will end my talk with two phrases. I wrote about All That Breeds, that the film's protagonists, they are acting out in interspecies ethics, which is very interesting. They are dealing with something that Haraway calls in her manifestos, you know, the kinship with life forms which aren't human, you know, companionship with all that breeds. And so these characters are really interesting because they won't limit the benevolence. They attempt to do good to creatures of human form. And they are trying to make the life better for all that breeds. That's, I think, touching and engaging. And I end this brief introduction to the research with another phrase I find very thought-provoking. Chief Seattle said that we did not weave the web of life, we are merely strands in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. So life as a tapestry, and I think this research I've been doing has a lot to do with concern and care for a damaged planet, and dealing with cultural production, with art forms, as ways that humankind is creating to deal with the mess we're in, let's say. So I think that's it. For further readings and discussions, I have two websites. I've been publishing lots of articles about that theme. For instance, about Bong Joon-ho and his work. And I'm also trying my best the last few years as a filmmaker, as a public intellectual, as a teacher of philosophy, which is my profession in Brazil, to be quite in tune, quite in solidarity with these movements that are taking the streets in order for us and future generations to have a livable planet. And I end with this photo, no music on a dead planet. My work deals mainly with cinema in the predicament of the Anthropocene that tries to help out in saving the web of life from becoming a wasteland. I think that's it. Hopefully we'll have a great discussion.
Thank you, Eduardo. We have quite some time for questions. Yeah?
You go ahead. I started last time.
Okay, thank you so much. There are many things that I found very interesting in your talk, and the topic of science fiction is anyway very close to my heart. Talking about science fiction, I was wondering, of course you look into film and the claim that the cinema itself is part and parcel of the Anthropocene. That makes sense to me, so I don't want you to speak to literature all that much. However, I think that I don't want to force you to do that. I mean, I think that still to this day the best of science fiction always starts in literature and only gradually becomes adopted by filmmaking. And within recent science fiction literature, we have this tendency to abandon the concepts of utopia and dystopia altogether. And if they appear, like in, there's this work by N.K. Jemisin, who won for the Broken Earth trilogy, which is among the best of literature that was ever written. The concepts of utopia and dystopia do not seem to speak to the problem of the planetary condition, to use Chakrabarty's words, anymore, as there is no such what if this goes on question that would drive the imagination of science fiction these days. So I was wondering, to make it into a question, if utopia and dystopia are still the kind of categories we need to think about that. I totally see that the dialectics between the two makes sense, but if so, then maybe it is more like the dystopia is the set as an aesthetic, scene that you can use, like Octavia Butler, for instance, to tell a story of hope and not of fear. Whereas the utopian setting is then usually used to tell a story of fear, which is underneath that, like Elysium maybe. So that would be one question.
Sure, that's very interesting. I agree totally with you about literature. Most of the science fiction classics we adore came from fiction. 2001 came from Arthur Clarke, and several other classics came from Philip K. Dick or from A.J. Wells. Clockwork Orange comes from Anthony Burgess. So it's hard to think about science fiction film as separate from the whole realm of artistic creation. We could call speculative fiction or anticipation narratives, and I tend to adore really like Haraway's claim that a philosopher or a biologist can never be blind to what artists are doing, because for our earthly survival, this cultural production of narratives, of anticipation, is really not irrelevant, not useless in any way, and not entertainment merely, it's kind of crucial. And I also like this idea you brought about some dystopic aesthetic scene that you may, from that very wasteland that seems to cause us fear and hopelessness, you try to construe some solution. Maybe Octavia Butler does this very well, but several films like Children of Man, they are really, for the main part, quite immersed in despair. You feel very badly watching what has become of mankind. Children of Man deals with the death of birth phenomenon. So women can no longer get pregnant because of mutations and genetic waste. But there's hope in the film when a new child is conceived and maybe there's a future possible for us. So that's the dialectics, It's hard to think of any film which is 100% despair, dystopia, and hopelessness. It seems like the film industry needs some glimpse of hope, of better times to come. So this is the idea behind the dialectics of utopia and dystopia. But the main point also in Viveiro de Castro and Danowski's work is that we don't have a balance of utopia and dystopia. If we think about cultural production, it seems that dystopia is more heavily on this imaginary balance. So there's an imbalance in cultural production in such a way that it's hard to think about utopic films that depict a better world to come and that are really grounded in science, let's say. We have like widespread cultural production dealing mainly with dystopia, wasteland, and even Disney Pixar, doing Wall-E. This is a symptom of the zeitgeist, I guess, Even commercial films, even the films that Netflix judges to be one of the greatest successes ever, like Don't Look Up, they are apocalyptic comedies with no happy ending, So this is a cultural phenomenon I'm interested in. Utopia has not been completely discarded, but certainly we are not living anymore in Thomas More's epoch, We don't have great films proposing utopias. I guess it's pretty hard to think about it. Any one of us can make this attempt to make a list of films we seen recently in science fiction that are anticipating the future of mankind, and how many are predominantly utopias and how many are predominantly dystopias. You may disagree with me, but I think that dystopias are becoming a predominant form in cultural production, in film, in literature, even in music, perhaps. Yes?
Yeah, but you were talking about how, in these dystopic scenarios, there's always this glimpse of hope. That I find a little bit I would like to question that, or maybe ask your opinion. Don't you think there's something quite ideological there potentially? There's, whenever, especially with blockbusters, but all sorts of other films, there's no scenario where I don't know, the birth of a new child, or this potential, hero, or there's always that possibility. Isn't that a little bit? I don't know. I'm wondering, what your thoughts on that? Whereas, in utopian settings, we tend to see that, nothing is as good as it seems. They're actually, this other darker side of it. You see what I mean? I don't know. I want to kind of question that, that play that is just so prevalent.
Yes. No, thanks for the question. I'm also thinking along these lines. You mentioned the word ideology. You say that perhaps there's some ideological attempt to always insert a hopeful message in a film that could otherwise be quite despairing, or could even produce mental health issues like eco-anxiety or eco-depression or something like that. There are some films that can produce that, you know, like maybe The Road or Melancholia. Some films, they definitely don't have a happy ending, you know. Melancholia starts with the collision of the two planets and it ends, sorry for the spoilers, but there's no hope for life on Earth. The adventure of the web of life in this planet is over with the collision of Earth and Melancholia. But these are not blockbusters, these are art house films, and Lars von Trier, you know, he's famously known for disliking happy endings and hopeful messages, you know. We might remember how Dancer in the Dark finished with Bjork's character condemned to death, you know. So this is interesting. Is it ideological to impose hopefulness in a story about our future? Like Children of Men, I think this is a great film. It's a masterpiece of science fiction, but I also think they managed to create some iconic, hopeful image of the Black Mother carrying a child among the wasteland and the armed policemen. So I think it's ideological in a sense that it relates to the cultural industry, and these films are produced by corporations. They need a certain margin of profit, and dystopias are profitable, but I think dystopia with a grain of hopeful utopianism perhaps sells better, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Like, I feel like, you know, the images of hope have become like completely ideological from what I see. I mean, I don't know, maybe we need a different version of like imagining the future apart from like, I don't know, traditional images of like a glimpse of hope. Like, I don't know what that would amount to. Like, I'm sure like there are artists dealing with that.
Yes.
Not very knowledgeable about that.
But there's good hopeful art, I guess. If you take Ursula Le Guin, for example, some books of her, they deal with utopia and dystopia in different planets, and she imagines other life forms that can keep the rainforests with all the biodiversity alive, and that's I'm quite okay with that message, you know, you have a cosmos, a universe, and in some corners of this universe, some creatures are producing wastelands and getting rid of the possibilities for life to flourish. But in the same cosmos, elsewhere, you can have another type of creature that really understands the importance of non-human animals and tropical rainforests and clean water and stuff. So there are good sci-fi literature that contains utopic elements, and I don't think Ursula Le Guin is simply being ideological. I think she has an agency as a public intellectual and as an artist doing that, you know, promising the biodiverse forest as necessary for our future, for our flourishing. Yes?
Sorry, somebody.
There was a question from Jeff for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, it might take us in a different direction. So, are you like building on this particular thread? If so, please.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, because you mentioned about how different species on the same planet produce different. One is wasting the potential of the planet, while the other is flourishing. Isn't that, or can that also highlight a problem that a lot of philosophers have with the Anthropocene? Because Anthropocene, in some sense, can be described as a return to meta-narratives, these global narratives of humans as a species.
Yes.
And this is the story of our planet. But I think her name is Yusuf in A Million Black Anthropocene. He points out that no, this is not human as a species. This is this person. This is this person. So in that sense, how can we convince the individual that have no part in it, the individual, for example, that refuses to fly, to take part in reshaping our thoughts when, I don't know, Bezos gets bored in the night and takes a plane to Tahiti?
Yes. No, that's very good remarks. And I was meaning to talk about that, but the term Anthropocene is highly controversial, mainly because of this you pointed out. It tends to get the whole of humanity, the humankind as a whole, and it tends to blame it on every Homo sapiens alive, or even from the Industrial Revolution onwards. It's like a blame piece. Mankind has done this. But several authors says this is not a right way to think about it. So Donna Haraway proposes the Cthulhucene, Andreas Malm and Moore propose the Capitalocene. There are other terms emerging like the Technocene, the Plantation scene, the Necrocene, and these other terms, they try to differentiate, let's say, the guilt and blame from, let's say, the innocence. For instance, this film, I recently watched The Oil Machine. It's about the North Sea in the UK. And one of the activists in the film talks about the terrible consequences of global warming in Bangladesh and Vietnam. So these countries probably will drown. 70-80% of their land will drown actually in the next few decades, with dozens of millions of climate refugees that have to flee. And yet countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam did almost nothing to produce greenhouse gas emissions. And contrasting to that, the UK continues to continuously builds pipelines and drills for oil in the North Sea, even though the youngsters in Glasgow and Edinburgh are taken to the streets and school striking on Fridays and joining Extinction Rebellion. So the system is really deranged, and is not about mankind as a whole, but really is about industrial capitalism, is about corporations of fossil fuels, is about agribusiness using pesticides, is about factory farms, and a poor peasant in Bangladesh has no blame or guilt in the Anthropocene, but the CEO of Shell surely does. I don't know if that's the point we're trying to make, but the narrative of the Anthropocene is really too all-encompassing, It tends to blame our species as a whole, whereas Andreas Malm, for instance, says, no, this is a problem of the ideology of progress in capitalism, industrialism, extractivism.
I think in the interest of time.
Yeah, so I guess I want to bring you back to like the beginning of your talk, and I had to say, like the project in general, like I'm in this similar field. I appreciate the work you're doing. I kind of miss the argument of the whole project though. There's a lot of kind of chronicling. There's a layering of like quite a lot of different, very fascinating ways of thinking about the cultural phenomena that you're studying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really get what like the selection criteria is. I don't really get what like your theoretical objective is, and what I want to know is how your analytic intimacy with your object. That's what I want to know, and I think you're about to get there when you talked about Anthropocenes. So let me put it this way: like in your reading, what is like the signature scene of an Anthropocene, and how is it different than other kinds of cinematic scenes?
Mm-hmm.
I have more to say, but I really want to know that, because I feel like there is something really interesting in that part of your demonstration, right? Like how you actually read these films that you didn't have time to talk about. So like, what's the signature?
Sure, thanks for the question. I think in this talk, for the nature of it, for the time scale we have, I can't really delve deeply in the analysis of a work of art, you know. But in the thesis, I'm trying to deal with these films in detail. I'm not, you know, just passing through like I did here. You know, there's a matter of time, you know. Here I have to do things really briefly, kind of.
No, I get it, but now we have 4 minutes, so let's hear it.
Yes, for instance, in the utopia, dystopia dialectics, when you mentioned the criteria for selecting films, I think the films, they have to deal with a landscape that has been radically transformed by human action. So my eye has been searching for that kind of artificiality that we see a lot in sci-fi, like skyscrapers and lots of geoengineering, and artificiality, I would say, is a concept I'm looking for, and I try to understand also the genealogy of this artificial world, you know, how human agency has produced, for example, the cyborg, or has produced the factory farm in Bong Joon-ho, and also about the selection criteria. This is a great theme, and I write about in the beginning of my thesis that I am mainly a philosophy teacher, and
so can you be short, please?
Yes.
The time is
So
almost up.
I'm a little bit,
For
sure, I'm a little bit grounded in pedagogy, you know, and I teach philosophy with aid of film. So I try to also find interesting productions to teach students about that.
We have one last question, which can have a short answer, maybe, and then I think we should close.
Keep it short. 2 points: Anthropocene and dialectics. Anthropocene. Following your discussion, I would like to remember all of us here that there once was a time that a French philosopher called Jean-François Lyotard told us, well, there's a typical element of what we call modernity, and that's grand narratives, telling us grand stories about the world, capitalism, the proletarian people, etc. The Anthropocene is such a grand narrative. And so I would say, shouldn't we be more careful in using that concept at all?
Yes.
A sub-point to that, if cinema is an aesthetic practice of the Anthropocene, it means that cinema is able to do self-reflection, at least in science fiction films, but also documentaries. So the Anthropocene cannot be a purely negative epoch, because there is at least cinema, maybe philosophy as well, that allows us to do self-reflection.
Yes.
The last point is dialectics. I think, Eduardo, that you are a little bit too superficial with that term. If there is a dialectics between utopia and dystopia, it means, following Hegel and Adorno, that there is a necessary connection between those 2 poles. So whenever we start to develop a utopian picture of life, it necessarily will become a dystopian one. And the other way around, if you start depicting the world of life dystopian, it necessarily will go back to a utopia. So in that sense, the term dialectics would make sense for me, and this is really a philosophical sense, and not sorry, when I say you use it a little bit superficially.
Half a minute answer, and then we can continue over drink.
Okay. No, thank you very much for the regards. I agree, let's beware of the grand narratives. and I'm doing the critique of the Anthropocene narrative also, you know, but it's such a buzzword, such a trending topic that kind of grasps us, and the matter of dialectics, I didn't have time to expand on that, but I completely agree. There's the poles. I usually think in terms of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So some necessary connection between the poles and some singular synthesis that the art form expresses.
Well,
And I'm going to finish with the self-reflection. I love the idea because I've been debating with Jennifer Fay if cinema is a window or if cinema is a mirror, and she tends to say that cinema is a mirror of the world. So, but it's not exactly, because it's a self-reflecting mirror of the world. It's a self-reflecting mirror of the Anthropocene, perhaps. But that's very interesting how the films self-reflect and criticize what they are part and parcel of.
So thank you for bringing us back to self-reflection again.
Yes.
Yeah, these elaborate paths. Thanks so much. And I hope you can all come and have a drink with us in the Jaren. So, please join us. We'll
Sure.
just walk over there.
Yes?
दिल्ली की हवा बदली और उसका हाजमा भी। सॉन्ग बर्ड्स अब और ऊंचा गाती हैं, जिससे उनकी आवाज़ ट्रैफिक के ऊपर सुनाई दे। छिपकलियों के पैर बदल रहे हैं। चील एक रिवायती जानवर है। हर चील एक तरह खाती है, नहाती है और एक ही तरह रेस्ट करती है पूरी जिंदगी। हर चील का एक कोड होता है, पर कोड टूटना अब नेचुरल हो गया है। अब हर कोई इस नए एनवायरनमेंट से एडजस्ट कर रहा है। चूहे, सुअर, मेंढक, मच्छर, कछुए, कीड़े, गाय, घोड़े, सब एक साथ एक शहर में। कुछ बर्ड्स अपने आप एक्सपेरिमेंट करते हैं, नए तौर तरीकों से, चीज़ों से। हमें कभी कभी केज में सिगरेट बट मिला करते थे। बाद में समझ आया चीलें उन्हें पैरासाइट रिपेलेंट की तरह यूज कर रही थी। इवोल्यूशन एक्सपेरिमेंटेशन को पसंद करती है। शहर की चीलें गांव की चीलों से या 3-4 जनरेशन पहले की चीलों से ज्यादा इनोवेटिव हैं। ये भी एक तरीके का नेचुरल सिलेक्शन ही है। इंसान अब उनका नेचुरल एनवायरनमेंट है।
The whole idea of energy entered my work around 1997 when I began to photograph oil fields and oil refineries. And I had this, what I call an oil epiphany, when one day I was driving and started to think about how oil had affected my life. And I was holding onto a plastic steering wheel that was probably made from oil derivatives in a car with paints that were oil, looking through glass that was probably heated through oil, driving on black tar. And I started to think about oil as a key building block of the last century. I thought of it as the oil party, that, you know, there's this great abundance of black liquid that gives us this mobility, this freedom. And I couldn't help but feel that, you know, China was kind of either joining the last dance or the second last dance to this party, that peak oil is somewhere that, you know, either we've hit it or we're about to hit it. You know, no matter what we do, we just can't get enough to supply the world demand. So to look at China and the way they're expanding to be the manufacturers of the world is a very different energy footprint. And because they're entering late in the game, it remains a question of how long they'll be able to sustain.
We're losing biodiversity at a rate that is truly unprecedented in human history.
All groups in the natural world are in decline, which means their populations are getting smaller day by day.
Since 1970, vertebrate animals, things like birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles, have declined by 60% in total. Large mammals have, on average, disappeared from 3/4 of the range where they're historically found.
What's different is that it's happening simultaneously in the Amazon, in Africa, in the Arctic. It's happening not at one place and not with one group of organisms, but with all biodiversity everywhere on the planet.
It means that 1 million species out of 8 million species on Earth are now threatened with extinction. 500,000 plants and animals and 500,000 insects.
Extinction is a natural process. Things come, they grow, their populations get huge, and then they decline. But it's the rate of extinction. That's the problem. So when you look at previous groups in the fossil records, then it's over millions of years they go extinct. Here, we're looking at tens of years.
Since 1500, 570 plant species and 700 animal species have gone extinct. Studies suggest that extinction is now happening 100 times faster than the natural evolutionary rate, and it's accelerating.
Globally, there was a shock because you hadn't pulled all the data together, that people hadn't realised that we have a very serious crisis on our hands.
This is a song recording of a male o'o singing on Kauai. These birds mate for life, so he would be singing a duet with his mate, where he sings and she sings back and forth. Here comes the male song. There's no response. Here's the male song again. That's the last male of a species singing for a female who will never come. He is totally alone. And now his voice is gone. In the brief lifetime of this collection, 70 years or so, many of the species that were recorded are now extinct. So the repository is a living example of the massive rate of extinction that's happening.
There's been 5 major extinctions in the history of the planet. There's the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, there's the Triassic, Jurassic, and then the KT extinction, the one that killed the dinosaurs. It's very difficult to comprehend in deep time, 4.6 billion years of Earth's history. So if you take, say, the history of the Earth and try to squeeze it into a 24-hour clock, where does man fit on that clock? A few seconds before midnight. That's it. We're the new kid on the block.
What we're seeing now is called the Anthropocene, the new epoch. Anthropocene means the time of humans. It's when the impact of humans is leaving itself as a mark in the fossil record of the future. 65 million years ago, that it was an asteroid that struck and caused the dinosaurs to go extinct.
When it comes to the 6th extinction event, we have no problem identifying the cause. Humanity has become the asteroid.
We're on that tipping point now, where it's either too late or just the beginning of a movement